Hello and welcome to Understanding Demand Avoidance with Amaze and Anita Marsden. So my name's Sue and I work as a navigator and trainer for Amaze's neurodevelopmental family support service. I've got lived experience of neurodivergence and demand avoidance, and I've written and edited a variety of SEND resources for parents. And now I'm going to hand over to Anita Marsden, who has co-created this workshop. Anita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Sue. And yeah, welcome everybody. It's a privilege to be here with you today. So my professional background is as a clinical psychologist, predominantly working in supporting neurodivergent individuals and their families. I've been working in the field of neurodivergence for over 25 years, initially in families' homes, working in an academic and research setting, and then also working in NHS services, both local services and also national specialist services around assessment and therapeutic work as well. I'm also a lecturer at Exeter University, teaching training therapists to work with autistic and learning disabled children and their families, and I'm also a trained mindfulness teacher. Uh, a thread throughout all of my work is to really try and value people's lived experience and bring in and affirm their experience of the world and couple that with our knowledge and understanding and research and evidence base as well. But I also bring in my own lived experience as a parent carer. And as a neurodivergent clinical psychologist. And I feel really grateful that my special interests professionally have coupled with my personal life, and I also have experience of demand avoidance and working with that. And so I hope that this shows in the training that we've created for you today. And I wanted to say that, we're all here bringing expertise. I really see parents and families as experts in their own children and their own situation. And really, the invitation for today is for you to listen. We're all on a journey, and you may disagree with some of the things that we're bringing. You may have your own experience and listen to that. I think people really need to get in touch with their intuition. So take what you will from the workshop that will benefit your family and your situation right now.
Thank you, Anita. First of all, thank you to all of you that took the time to fill in our demand avoidance survey before the workshop. We had over 75 responses, and that's helped us to design the workshop today. And we're going to cover 6 topics in the session, and also provide you with some takeaways and links to further information and resources. So as you can see, we're going to cover what is demand avoidance, understanding a little bit about nervous systems and distress behaviour, parental well-being, managing demand avoidance, advocating for your demand avoidant child, and moving to adulthood. And then, as I say, there'll be takeaways and links to further resources. So the demand avoidance survey, your responses have helped us to understand common themes for families. So we know you want to understand more about demand avoidance, how it's identified and what triggers it. And you'd also like strategies to support you, your child and your family. And parents also said that they wanted help advocating for their child. And a few of you also asked about education and preparation for adulthood. So we'll be touching on these in the workshop as well. And the questions that we received in the survey showed us that parents have a lot of similar key areas that they want to prioritise today. So you'll see that it includes everything from understanding demand avoidance to reducing anxiety, strategies, transitions, task switching, burnout, your mental health, your child's mental health, and also how you advocate for your child. When we're actually doing the workshop today, you'll find that the questions that a lot of you asked have actually been embedded into the material that we're presenting today. And we've actually used that to sort of shape next steps.
Thanks, Sue. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment before we get into the kind of like heady, information heavy parts, because there's two ways of learning. And I just really want us to connect with both because there's heavy intellectual kind of information, and that's really important. What does that mean? How does that sit for you? But there's also what is that experience like? How does that feel? And I'm naming this as well because this is also really important for our demand avoidant children. And so, when someone very wise once said to me, when you teach, place what you want, this key construct at the center of the room. So, I really, really want to place safety at the center of the room today. And as Sue said, it's really important to meet your needs, but we can only really meet our needs if we know what our needs are. And unfortunately, we live in a world where we're kind of conditioned out of listening to our bodies and listening to our needs. But I'm just going to take a moment here before we get into that heady part and lots of information, just to kind of sort of ground ourselves. This is partly for me because I'm going to be speaking to you and I can feel my heart racing a little bit. I can feel that kind of anticipatory anxiety of like adrenaline in my blood. So I just want to take a moment to just check in with yourself. Where are you right now? Are you here? Are you paying attention to us? Or are have you already had a crazy morning in order to just get here today? So is there some fizzy energy around? Maybe there's some eagerness, like, come on, get on with this. So again, just really, it's an invitation to check in with yourself. And there might be moments where we're going to invite you to kind of check in with yourself through the workshop as well, because it's actually really key in terms of understanding what our needs are and our children's needs as well. And as Sue said, it's really hard having demand avoidance in our household, and some of what we're going to be talking about today requires you to pay attention to your needs and to resource yourself and to make sure that you are comfortable. So I've stood up right now because I know that allows me to move the energy around my body. I've got some fidgets here, I've got a candle lit, again, just like making sure that you are taking care of. Are you warm enough? Have you got a drink? If you need to get some water, get some water. So what is demand avoidance and PDA? We're going to have a section where we're just going to try and make sense of some of this stuff. Okay. So, demands. Demands are loads of things and they create pressure. They are basically anything that's expected of us, and they can be external from other people. So, parents, friends, school, society, culture. And they can be internal as well. They can come from our bodies. So the internal sense of thirst, hunger, sleep, needing the toilet. But also we sometimes internalize those outside expectations. So I don't know, I had a parent who always wanted to be on time. So I always internalize that we can't be late, we can't be late. And society has lots of expectations, which we'll talk about through the workshop, because some of this work of parenting and having demand avoidance in our household is letting go of some of those societal expectations. It's really important also to acknowledge that demands can be things we want to do, like going to see a friend or going to a party. And actually, we'll talk a bit more about this later, but one child that I worked with demand avoidance talked about their opposite brain. And I love that. It was almost like anything that was expected of them, their brain just threw up the opposite. No, you're not going to do that. Okay, so demand avoidance, it's really important to normalize demand avoidance as well. It's a human characteristic. Everyone knows that Monday morning feeling where you have to get up and go to work. If you're someone who gets up and goes to work, perhaps you're not, and you've shaped your life around that. It's dimensional. So we've got this beautiful arrow down here that Sue did for us, and it shows that actually it's from kind of not much demand avoidance to way too much demand avoidance. And, there's a manageable amount of demand avoidance, but actually then there's too much. And then there's a small group at the end that we'll talk about in a minute, which may be those PDAs. It can fluctuate as well. It can be impacted by stress. It's really important to talk about that as well. And it's a sign that we're struggling, and that we need to listen. So again, that kind of listening and awareness. I had quite a lot of demand avoidance when trying to prep for this talk, and needed to trick my little brain into being able to do this hard work. And it was enormously helpful to have Sue alongside me doing that. Okay. So PDA, pathological demand avoidance. It's just to be really clear, it is not a diagnostic category. So it is a debated area. And much more research is needed. However, it has gained traction, it has gained recognition, and I think it's an enormously important term. So it was first thought about in the 1980s by Elizabeth Newsom, and very, very slowly people have started to explore it and research it. So the first paper was in the early 2000s, and then the PDA Society was formed in 2014, and then what we call a systematic review, so a paper that looks at all the research currently, was done in 2021. And then in 2022, the PDA Society decided actually we really need to support professionals out there to identify PDA. So they developed this really comprehensive guidelines to support identification. And it's a really enormously important document. You will get the link to this document afterwards in the email that Amaze sends. I highly recommend having a look at it if you're interested. It is a guideline for professionals, but it's really readable. And whenever I have a parent who's wondering if their child is demand avoidant or PDA, I recommend they go and have a look at that. If you are interested, so that would be my first port of call, have a look at that document. But if you haven't yet had your autism assessment, talk about it at your autism assessment, because certainly in East Sussex, the East Sussex professionals have acknowledged that it's something they are happy to think about within their assessments. And there are a couple of tools. So there's the EDAQ-8, which is the Extreme Demand Avoidance Questionnaire. It's a research questionnaire with 8 questions, so it's pretty small, but it gives an indication about how much demand avoidance there might be in a child's profile. So that's something that professionals might use. They might also, and hopefully, take observations during that autism diagnostic observation schedule, the ADOS, which is contributing to the autism diagnostic assessment as well. So perhaps I didn't say this, but at the moment, the current thoughts are that it's a small group of children on the autism spectrum, so it's part of autism. But again, part of the debate is that some people think it needs to be a diagnostic category in and of itself, and that doesn't necessarily exist just with autism. And other people know that lots of the anecdotal research is that it coincides with ADHD very, very heavily. And so some people think that perhaps it's part of ADHD because it's quite an impulsive thing. But again, more research is needed. So the PDA Society have a research network that are trying to design studies to look into this at the moment.
So if I could just chip in and say East Sussex County Council have a position statement as well on PDA, which we will also send a link to in our resources.
Thanks, Sue. So it's actually East Sussex Health, Local Authority and Education all signed up to this position statement, which basically says we recognise PDA as a profile of the autism spectrum and recognise that it needs different management and support. So if you're in East Sussex, there's quite a weighty argument as to if you think that's what your child's presenting with, to share that with your school or whatever as a way of advocating for them. Thanks, Sue. Okay, so just to pull out of the guidance, so the PDA Society's guidance recognises demand avoidance as part of a spectrum. Like we just said, it's dimensional, a human characteristic, but that it's seen in greater extents in neurodivergent and autistic individuals, likely as the demands of being part of this kind of world are greater for them. And we can think a bit later about why that might be. But in pathological demand avoidance, so there's this small group of children, those that sort of pip over a threshold of kind of tolerable demand avoidance, where it significantly impacts daily life and becomes excessive. So the breadth and depth of their demand avoidance is much greater. And these 6 characteristics form that identifying guidelines. So resists and avoids the ordinary demands of life, uses social strategies as part of the avoidance. So these are those savvy kids who are really able to like navigate and get everyone coming around them. And it's why sometimes they're missed within assessments, because they seem very sociable. They're actually really able to kind of lead and bring people together. And some people have said that PDA kids are natural born leaders. So can seem sociable on the surface, but perhaps I don't particularly like this term, lacking some understanding. I think it just means that actually, you know, their social skills are perhaps different, and that they are really good in some spheres and perhaps find other areas harder. There's typically challenges with impulsivity, those really quick I guess, moments of fight and flight reactivity. And we'll come back to that when we talk about our nervous systems. There is often quite obsessive behavior, so having really deep interests, and sometimes this can focus on other people. So again, maybe that is another reason they get missed within diagnostic assessments, because they seem interested in other people, and they can appear comfortable in role play and pretend. So lots of the kids I've worked with love pretending to be an animal. Often this is the kind of like sociability that they have as well. Okay. Obviously, demand avoidance can impact so many areas of life, and we've just identified those areas of life here, which feels really important to pull out. And this just sort of like every area, dressing, self-care, leaving the house, going to school, this kind of stress in the system can also have a knock-on impact on us as well. And there's a theory by Dan Siegel called interpersonal neurobiology, which basically says my brainwaves affect your brainwaves. We all know those people that we can be around that can be quite triggering for us, that we might find actually a bit stressful to be around. So it can impact relationships, the family unit, and beyond that. And we're going to talk a bit about that later as well. And it can create huge challenges in the education environment as well. Okay. So, what impacts someone's profile? So I think it's really helpful. Sorry, I'm basically just a bit distracted. I'm trying to work out what my timings are and when I need to be finishing this section, but I think I'm okay. So it's really important that we think about people's individual characteristics. So I did have a whole slide, which was from Tony Atwood and Michelle Garnett, who did some training for the PDA Society about what the current conceptualization of PDA is. That means like, what's our current thinking? Where on earth does it come from? And they have identified through the research that there may be some genetic factors, that there's very likely some differences in neurology. So what we're thinking about, and what this is why we're going to be talking about our nervous systems today, that having a sensitive nervous system, so being more sensitive to threats in our environment, and perhaps less sensitive part of our nervous system at relaxation and calming us. That there is this crossover with ADHD, possibly an element of impulsivity. They've also picked up in the research some perhaps hormonal differences, and really important part of the research is that it seems like there's a higher prevalence of trauma, PTSD, certainly within autism, and we think perhaps for these kids. And again, it's like how vulnerable their nervous system is to experiencing the world as traumatic. It's not to say that the situations are objectively traumatic. We're not saying that they are experiencing abuse and trauma in another way, but that their bodies are experiencing it. So it's really important that we think very carefully about the environment that our children are in. So individual characteristics, past experiences, knowing that maybe there's some sensitivity and vulnerability there. And then the environment. What environment is someone in? The home, school, community, culture, and even, I guess, we are part of their environment as their parents, and maybe our interaction of our neurodivergence and demand avoidance as well, which again we'll talk about in a bit. But just to be clear, there's no biological test. As I said, this isn't a diagnostic category. At the moment, we kind of talk about identifying demand avoidance or identifying PDA. And again, just to be really clear, that even diagnosis such as ADHD or autism, they are all social constructs. That means that humans, us, are their definitions, their descriptions of the spectrum of human experience, and a way of understanding. They really help us to understand. It's not to deny their existence, but they are still a way of understanding. That's why our diagnostic categories change when people come together and they re-ratify them. But it's really important that we think about, why might demand avoidance exist? Are there some strengths of it? And I always like to think in an evolutionary perspective that, yeah, actually having someone, if we were in a tribe, who was really sensitive to threat, who was really aware of when we were under threat from predators or when food was dangerous or whatever, was really important for our survival. And again, we'll come back to that when we talk about our nervous system. So again, just to depathologize some of these experiences can be really important. So you could map each of these areas out for your child if you wish. And I think, again, we'll talk a bit about that vulnerability. Maybe there's vulnerability there and how important it is that we think about the environment. Okay. So as you said, demand avoidance, it's okay. It's a normal human trait. It's just that when it gets too much, it can be really impairing. And also for PDA, we think that there is a small group of children who present in a way that are often missed during appointments, and that PDA Society guidelines talk about, if your child has had multiple assessments and people have not identified their profile, it may be that they are PDA. So have a look in there. There is also this small group of children whose needs are not met by conventional approaches, who end up marginalised, out of school and socially excluded. So this is a social justice issue. It's really important that we pay attention to this as well. So for this group of children, our understanding and adapting our approaches is vital. But to be really clear, so it's a both and. It is helpful to know if your child is PDA, but also these approaches are not harmful. So we can use them regardless of whether our child's been identified as PDA. And often what we find is that variability in demand avoidance that might be related to stress on the system maybe shoves them a little bit back down that arrow. Whether it shoves them out of the PDA category or not, I think is debatable, but it certainly can support that kind of flexibility. Maybe we all have a little range, and where our range is, if we could bring ourselves down the bottom of our range, is helpful. Okay. So this is taken a little bit from the research, in particular, a group of people, the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, Frankie Happy and Elizabeth O'Nions, where they were looking about, like, why on earth does demand avoidance exist? There are some factors that from the research that we think are just related to those kind of typical autistic experiences, sensory sensitivities, challenges with uncertainty, rich to lean transitions. I struggle to understand this phrase for ages, but what that means is rich is like doing something you absolutely love, so gaming or whatever, to lean, which is something you don't want to do, like coming to the dinner table, transition. So it's like moving from something you love to something you don't really love. Having a need for control, which may be anxiety related, and having some challenges kind of reading the world around you, including the kind of social world of other people. Over here, we've got this kind of demand avoidance trap where when a demand is perhaps given, our child experiences that demand anxiety. The adults then respond to that demand anxiety. So the demand is given, come to the dinner table. The child is like, no, or start doing whatever it is that they use as a way of kind of expressing that avoidance. The adults double down. They might be strict and threatening. You must come to the table. Or they try to say, well, look, if you come to the table, there'll be food. If you don't, there won't be food. And actually, that kind of escalates that experience of demand and anxiety. And we end up in this kind of cycle. I certainly know I have ended up in that demand avoidance trap lots. But ultimately, what we're talking about is this demand avoidance trap, and these autistic experiences ultimately create stress on our system and a feeling of a lack of safety. And we'll come back to this later. Okay. So as I said, it's really important that we think about the environment. Dr. Luke Bearden, who is a fantastic advocate for neurodivergent people, especially autistic people, has this golden equation, which is that autism plus environment equals outcome. I think it's really, really helpful. I think what he's saying is that we need to think carefully about the environment for our children. And I think even more so if we are recognizing high levels of demand avoidance, I think we need to think very carefully about the environment. And I know Sue will talk about that later when we're thinking about education. And this is a quote that I really like from Naomi Fisher. It's poor mental health is an outcome. It's what happens when humans are put into situations which they can't manage and where their needs aren't met. It's an interaction between the person and the environment. And it's really important that we know that bit there, humans, we are all different. So the environment doesn't have to be the same. And I think this is part of the problem, is that we expect our children to fit into a universal environment, a kind of one size fits all. And that isn't great for lots of our kids. Okay. I just wanted to put in here the Maori word for autism. So Maori is the indigenous people of New Zealand. That's the original people from New Zealand. And the Maori word for autism is takiwatanga, which means in his or her own time and space. And I just think it's really beautiful, a depathologizing way of thinking about autism, that actually our children do need their own time and space. Okay. So coming back to those priorities, just really, really holding those priorities for yourself at the forefront as we're kind of going through this talk today. So from that section, take-home points are: demand avoidance indicates stress. It's communicating something to us. So it's really important to listen. It's complex. We don't fully understand it yet. There's lots more research happening right now. But what we do know is what can help. So for me, that's great from a therapeutic perspective, working with parents. And understanding our nervous systems is the first place to start. So we're going to spend some time in the next section understanding our nervous systems. Okay. So just taking a pause here. I'm hoping that this is going to be about 25 minutes. If you've got pen and paper again, like Sue said, you can note down what strikes you, what kind of hits home for you, how you make meaning over this information that you're hearing today. So our nervous systems are enormously important, and I would say there's been an explosion in our understanding of neuroscience and our nervous systems over the last 20 years, especially in the last kind of 10 years. So it's really important. So our nervous systems are the foundation. So I'm going to talk to you so that we can understand what's kind of going on. So moment to moment, we are always on this continuum of receptive to defensive. Yeah. We're always either very open or a little bit less open, and our kids especially. And how vulnerable or sturdy our nervous system is based on our kind of foundation. And our foundation is something that we call our body budget. Okay, this is a concept by Lisa Feldman Barrett, who is a neuroscientist. Our body budget is a biological process, which is known as allostasis. But basically, our bodies are constantly working out whether we have got enough water, salt, glucose. It just happens. It's automatic. And different things make deposits into our body budget. So we think about it like a bank account. If we've had a good night's sleep, our water, salt, glucose, they are going to be much more replenished, plus all of our other hormones and things that we need to survive day to day. If we've been doing something pleasurable, playing, having a hug, those things make deposits into our body budget. Other things make withdrawals from our body budget. So, a bad night's sleep for me is a massive withdrawal. I know I'm going to be really struggling because those basic chemicals in my brain and my body have not had time to replenish. I can feel it. But also, stress can. So, things like being late or being ignored by somebody. Stress is a withdrawal from our body budget, which is a really key point here because what you guys are probably aware is that our children who are finding the world a bit more stressful than usual are then having more withdrawals from their body budget. And that makes them, in a circular way, much more vulnerable to finding the world more stressful. And so it's really important to hold in mind, think about that concept of the body budget, about what gives and what takes from our child. Okay. So I wanted to share with you something called polyvagal theory. You guys might have heard of this. This is another word. So poly is as many, vagal refers to the vagus nerve, and it runs from the bottom of our brain all the way down our spinal cord, and it comes into our face, into our chest, into our guts and stomach. So it's a really important nerve to understand for me, certainly as a psychologist, and to try and convey to you guys. It is part of our nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. That is our nervous system, which is in control of things like our heartbeat, our temperature control. So it's not under our conscious control. We don't tell our body to breathe or to get warmer or colder. And this is a really key point because our threat and safety detection system is part of our autonomic nervous system. So lots of the things that we're talking about with regards to our children's behavior is not under their conscious control. And I shared this recently at a big conference that I did for teachers across West Sussex, East Sussex and Brighton and Hove, because obviously our school system is based on all behavior being under conscious control. So we need to start to unpick that. So we all have a threat and safety detection system, which is part of our autonomic nervous system, which I'll talk about in a minute. And there are three pathways which are really important to understand with regards to emotional regulation. I love a model. I really like putting things into boxes. It helps me understand and takes away some of that uncertainty. So I hope that you find that useful. And I'm also going to talk about how co-regulation is really key and also a challenge, especially when we're thinking about our mental health and our well-being. Okay. So as I said, we all have this threat and safety detection system. So polyvagal theory was kind of coined and wrote about by Stephen Porges, and he coined this term neuroception. This is like a sense that we are constantly scanning our environment for signs of threat and safety. Okay, so in the very basic sense, we are constantly scanning our environment. It's part of our autonomic nervous system. So as you guys will know, it's automatic. It's not under our conscious control. It's what we call precognitive and pre-linguistic. That means it happens before thought or before language. We don't get to choose this. And so coming back to our conceptualization, perhaps of demand avoidance and PDA, we think that maybe our children have got a heightened awareness or in their systems of threat and safety. And so many parents that I worked with say, oh yeah, my kid's really aware before I know I'm stressed, they know I'm stressed. Yeah. To be really clear, like I said, it kept our ancestors alive. It was enormously important. It's kind of less important now and can get in the way of life. So when my heart was thumping and my body was ready to run away at the beginning of this talk, that was sort of unhelpful. But my knowledge and understanding of what was going on perhaps helped me to engage some of my higher order thinking to be able to kind of calm my nervous system. So just to be clear, that neuroception is constantly scanning our external environment outside our bodies, our inside environment inside our bodies, and the relationship or the connection in other people's nervous systems again. So that reminds me of the slide I was talking about demands being external, internal, and sometimes between people. So
We are always, each of us as an individual, us, our children, our children's teachers, MPs, everyone, constantly receiving and broadcasting signs of danger and safety. Um, and so we're constantly kind of tapping into uh, whether uh, whether someone is a safe person to be around. And like I said, I think our children can be really good barometers of whether an environment is safe, a person is safe or not. But also, it's individual to them. So we'll come on to that in a second. I'm just going to check I've said everything here. So, like I said, our our nervous system, we can think about it in these three different areas. So, when we are regulated, we're at the top of our ladder, and we are feeling safe and secure. We're engaged, we're grounded, we're connected, we're receptive. Our nervous systems are receptive. Perhaps this is when our body budget is nice and full. And this part of our vagus nerve is our ventral vagal. It innervates our face. Uh, so we're able to use our facial expressions, our tone of voice, our eye contact to broadcast that we are feeling regulated, we're feeling safe and engaged and ready. So as parents, we're probably feeling kind of patient and present. We're able to feeling well resourced. When we're observing our kids at the top of their ladder, they're feeling relaxed. They've got a relaxed posture, their breathing is nice and regular. They're probably feeling quite playful, maybe they're laughing, they're joyful. When our neuroception detects danger, we release adrenaline and cortisol, and we become what we call kind of hyper aroused. We move down the ladder. This is the sympathetic nervous system gearing up, ready for action. This is fight or flight response. It happens automatically. It's part of our autonomic nervous system. And we mobilize, we get ready for action. So at the beginning of this talk, I was ready to run away. I knew I couldn't do that. I think Sue's quite glad about that. But my body was doing exactly what it should have done. It's a biological imperative. It was responding to stress and getting me ready to respond to that stress. So when that happens in a parenting moment, we can find ourselves being kind of dismissive. We don't have time for our children. We might be harsh. We might, in Dan Siegel's language, we might flip our lids. We might lose it and behave in a way that we regret. For our children, this is when we're going to see those avoidance behaviors. This is when we're going to see them growling at us rather than using their words. This is when they might move to fight. This is when they might hit or attack us. They might throw things. They're going to be erratic and impulsive. Their breathing is generally going to be faster. So that is automatic. It's happening. Their bodies are doing what it should be doing, even though we don't want that to happen. They're likely to have muscle tension and clenching. So the reason for sharing this is so that we can observe and we can witness and we can understand. So Dan Siegel, the American neuroscientist, talks about name it to tame it. When we can give something language, it helps us feel less stressed by it. In fact, there's research that shows our brains are less reactive when we can give something or some process a name. When we experience stress for too long, or we can't escape, we move further down the ladder. When we move further down the ladder, we experience disconnection. We are hypo-aroused. Our body says, I can't take this anymore. I need to preserve energy. You've taken too much from my body budget. And this is when we move to a state of immobilization. This is our dorsal vagal. So this is the part that innervates our guts and our stomach. We're going to move to shut down, and we're going to feel quite low. When we're a parent and we've been experiencing chronic stress, we can find sometimes at periods of time or for long periods of time, we might feel quite flat, empty, stuck. If our children experience chronic stress as well, we're going to see them not really want to engage in play or previously enjoyed activities. They might be quite slow in their movements, slow in their breathing. They might look down. Their social engagement system, when they're at the top of their ladder, it might be not available. So we're going to feel disconnected from each other, and we'll come on to our family relationships, but it can massively impact our relationships. Okay. As I said, co-regulation is enormously important. It is a biological imperative. We need co-regulation first to survive and then to thrive. And when I'm talking about co-regulation, I'm talking about one person's nervous system regulating another person's nervous system. So there's a quote here from Lisa Feldman Barrett: "We are the caretakers of each other's nervous systems as much as we are the caretakers of our own." And it sustains life. When we first have our children, they are helpless without that co-regulation. We are attuning to them constantly and co-regulating. It's absolutely exhausting. And for children with demand avoidance, that carries on. That biological imperative for co-regulation carries on through life. As we get older, there is increased opportunity for self-regulation, but we never lose the need for co-regulation. It is absolutely necessary for physical and emotional well-being, and it's really important. It might look different for an ND child. So, as I said, our ventral vagal innervates our face, but actually our autistic children might be experiencing lots of social engagement, but their eye contact, they have differences in their preferences. They might sit alongside rather than wanting physical touch. They might have flat facial expressions, and we have to learn to attune that does not mean that they are not happy, even though that might be broadcasting signals of. We're going to invite you to map your own nervous systems. It's going to take about 10 minutes, I expect. And like I say, I'm going to guide you through it. So I'm going to be giving instructions throughout. It's really helpful to understand our nervous systems. If we can map our own nervous systems, we're much more easily able to map our children's nervous systems. And just to be really clear, this is what I would do in a therapeutic activity if I was working with people therapeutically. So what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to start with kind of the red zone, the hyper arousal. And I'm going to invite you to bring in a time when you can remember that you were a bit dysregulated. I'd invite you to perhaps bring in a time when you were maybe feeling a bit angsty, rather than perhaps a time when you lost it. Unless you feel safe to do that, that's okay. Because just recalling a time that we were dysregulated brings in some of that energy, and it cannot feel good for us. So again, just looking after yourself. If you don't want to do this right now, you don't have to. Then I'm going to invite you to connect with a time perhaps that you felt disconnected and hyper aroused and a bit shut down. And we're going to map that, and we're going to finish on regulation again, like I just said, because we'll bring in some of that energy of the last time that you were feeling connected and grounded, and sort of go into the detail of that. So if you're feeling resourced, then please feel free to do this activity. If you're recognizing that you're not feeling resourced today, give yourself a moment to kind of pause and have a bit of a break. So we'll move into a 10-minute break after this exercise. I guess, Sue, I'm going to open up to you. Does that sound understandable?
Yes, I think it's a good idea to have the activity now, and I don't mind sharing. I was feeling a bit dysregulated earlier because my next door neighbour's driveway is being dug up, and it's very, very loud, and I was getting quite stressed about the drilling noise in the background. So that was my little bit of dysregulation this morning.
Thanks, Sue. Okay, so if people want to join in this activity, just take a moment to grab piece of paper, pens. You can make notes in whatever way you like to make notes. If you've got some coloured pens lying around, then you could also engage in a slightly more creative side of your brain. So there is an invitation to kind of ask yourself what colour each of these zones are for you. So I've identified green, red and blue, but actually these zones might be different colours for you. And if they are and you want to, you're very welcome to grab different colours. So what we're going to do is we're going to map each area, and we're going to ask ourselves these questions around what happens in our body, what do we do, what do we feel, what do we think and say, What's our sleep like, our relationship to food, any other coping strategies? And at the end, we're going to ask ourselves what we believe about ourselves and the world. So I'm going to guide you through that for each area. So don't worry about remembering those things. Okay, so like I said, we are going to start with the red zone. So the invitation here is to bring to mind a time when you have felt hyper aroused. So when you have felt in danger, stressed, anxious, agitated, maybe ask yourself when you felt this kind of adrenaline, hyper arousal kind of flooding your nervous system, this mobilizing energy. Try not to put too much in there, but just sense a little bit of it. So that sense of unease without being overwhelmed. Maybe where you think, oh, one thing more will put me over the edge. So if you've got a situation now to mind, just let enough of that energy into your mind and body to get a flavor of it. And then we're going to ask those questions again. So you're in that red zone, you're feeling hyper aroused, you're feeling stressed. What is going on in your body? What do you feel in your body? Can you feel anything in your muscles, your heart? Tension? Do you need the toilet? So what's going on in your body? Then what do you do? Like what behavior? Like, are you pacing? Are you sitting down? Are you running away? What do you do? And what do you feel? What are the kind of words that come to mind around your emotions? Do you feel cross, stressed, angry, agitated? And what do you think and say? What are the thoughts that are going through your mind or coming out of your mouth? God, this is awful. I can't cope. And when you're in this stress state, what's your relationship with food? Are you overeating, undereating? How are you sleeping? Is it difficult to get to sleep? Any other kind of coping strategies that you use at this time? And then when you're in this stress state, what do you believe about yourself and the world? So if you ask yourself the question, I am, what statement might come out? I am overwhelmed. I am not good enough. I am just like my mother. And ask yourself the question, the world is dangerous. The world is not supporting me. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And you maybe give yourself time to go back to that after the workshop if that feels helpful for you. So we're going to take a step down the ladder. We're going to move to dorsal vagal. We're going to move to that disconnected, hypo-aroused, immobilized, disconnected, shut down state. So if you bring the stress, the red zone energy to a close, and we now move to the blue zone energy. So I'm going to invite you to think of a time when perhaps your system went to that sense of collapse. Maybe there's not enough energy to run your system. If you were in a room of people, it might feel like there was a kind of glass screen between you and them. Like you could see them, but you just couldn't really connect with them. It might feel hopeless. You might be worried about when it might clear. So just let a tiny bit of that energy into your mind and body, just enough to get a taste of it. And now we're going to map it. So what happens in your body in the blue zone? What are you experiencing? Are you feeling flopped down? Is your stomach bad? What's going on? And what do you do? Are you sort of just not able to go out? Are you sort of looking down, not really connecting with people around you? What do you feel? What are those emotional words that might sit here for you? I just feel exhausted, low. What are you thinking and saying? What's going through your mind? I'm sorry, guys, I just can't help you right now. Actually, could you get your own snacks? Could you? I really just can't do this. What's your relationship to sleep, food, any other kind of coping strategies? We haven't talked about, maybe sometimes we use things like TV or alcohol to kind of numb our experiences. And then the end of each section, recognizing how you're feeling. I am. You're not able. The world is. Okay. So just bringing that blue zone to a close, if that feels okay. And then let's come back up the ladder. And we're going to come right to the top. We're going to try and bring to mind a time when we were feeling safe and secure, a time when we were in our social engagement system. We were feeling grounded, receptive, a time when you felt everything was okay. It doesn't have to be wonderful, just okay. You've managed to get the kids to school and you've got home and you've made a cup of tea and you can have a moment of peace. So let's bring the last time that happened to mind. The world is safe enough and you can move through it with ease. So bringing this moment to life, maybe it was an interaction with one of your children when they were also in their social engagement system and you felt that pang of connection. You were able to give each other a face rub or some eye contact, whatever. Just bring that where you just sort of felt it in the core of your body. So fully alive, bringing that fully alive. What's going on in your body when you are feeling safe and secure? What do you do? How are you acting? Maybe you recognize that, yeah, you're sort of moving through life a bit easier. How are you feeling? Are you feeling kind of content, peaceful, joyful? What might you think and say? Do you know what? I'm doing all right. I've done good enough today. And how are you sleeping? What's your relationship to food? And maybe at the end of this section, asking yourself, I am good enough. Or even I'm nailing it. And the world is beautiful. The sun is shining. Okay. So just bringing that activity to a close, and I guess just again sort of landing us in that idea of like bringing awareness, bringing knowledge and understanding to our nervous systems, to these processes as being a survival mechanism. When we move to fight and flight or to freeze, our bodies are communicating this lack of safety to us. We are not in control of it. We are in control of exploring and understanding, of befriending it. We're going to talk about in a bit, befriending our nervous system and learning more about it. And I will certainly guide you to some more resources. Mona Delahook's book, Brain Body Parenting, is one of my go-to recommendations for parents that want to understand this in more detail and learn about how to capitalize on this understanding to support their children to thrive. Okay. It's really important to recognize that PDA, demand avoidance, is about autonomy, agency, as well as anxiety. So Christy Forbes, who's an amazing PDA advocate, has talked about the pervasive drive for autonomy. Dr Dr. Milton has talked about asserting autistic agency in a neurotypical world, and as I mentioned, the Maori word earlier, in one's own time and space. That actually we have to also respect and honour our children's need for agency and autonomy in a world which removes that from them in many, many, many ways. So we'll be thinking a bit about this as well. Okay, take home points here. Understanding what's going on in our nervous system is super important. It can help us move to a place of compassion or self-compassion rather than being triggered, because if we understand it as a survival mechanism and not under conscious control, it helps us to move away from that more mainstream parenting model of rewards and punishments. And we'll come on to low demand parenting later. So it helps us move from they're giving us a hard time to they're having a hard time, which is an enormously important mindset shift. And it can help us learn about and move more towards safety and connection before correction. If we understand that they need to come back up that ladder before we talk about what on earth their behavior was like, that can be really helpful. So as I said, it helps us to understand and befriend our nervous systems, and then we can map and track them. Okay, so one of the responses to the survey was about parental well-being, and we're really glad that people raise that because we think it is really important, and it relates to what we've just been talking about nervous systems. So understanding our own nervous systems, which we've just mapped out, as being kind of central and foundational to supporting our children. Okay, so it is absolutely recognised that supporting a demand avoidant PDA child or children can have a massive impact on all aspects of life and all relationships. And there are some studies which have interviewed parents of PDA children, and the messages come out around the experience of parenting, that it can feel like walking on eggshells, that can be enormously triggering to our own survival ladders, like we've just talked about, and that there can be this double bind. I think this is a really, really important construct to understand, that our children's nervous systems perhaps are more sensitive and their need for co-regulation is greater. They need us to be close, often very physically close, not wanting to leave our side or go to the toilet or go upstairs on their own. But that dysregulation that is sometimes can be verbally and physically aggressive can make it very hard for us as parents to be close to them, which is exactly what they need. So just recognizing that is a really tricky double bind. It can impact our relationships with partners if we have them, because our children are so needy and needing that co-regulation. There's no space for someone else. There's no capacity. It can also impact our communication. If we are not at the top of our ladder, I'm just going to be really clear, the language centers of our brain are not fully online. So we're also not communicating in the way that we want to communicate, which can be problematic and can cause arguments between parents as well. And what does that do? That can probably cause our children's threat detection system to go off. Really frustrating, but it's not. I think sometimes outsiders can think of that as the cause for our children's sensitive nervous systems, but I think we have to think systemically and step outside that. Actually parenting a child with a very sensitive nervous system can, and not to place a pathology on them, but it is a systemic challenge. We can also have different understandings of what's going on for our children and their different parenting approaches, which can be tricky. If there are siblings in the household, often those siblings' needs are pushed to one side if they're not as great as the demand avoidant child. And those siblings, quite rightly, will feel resentful, overlooked, sometimes quite hypervigilant, because actually they are often witnessing quite traumatic incidences. And that is heartbreaking. That can be really hard to recognize that one of your children is hiding because they're scared of their sibling when they have got dysregulated, when they have moved into that fight or flight. And it can also affect our relationships with extended family or out into our communities. We can feel judged and blamed, misunderstood. If we need to be taking a different parenting approach to the mainstream, that can be really hard, and it can lead to isolation and withdrawal as a way of kind of managing that. So some ideas, because we want to be hopeful and practical about what might be supportive. So like we've said, trying to frame that what's going on between us as parents and children as a survival response. Trying to understand their nervous systems perhaps can bring some compassion for that distress and for our own triggering and distress as well. Looking at low demand approaches, which we'll talk about in a bit, but prioritizing our own well-being, that has to be high up the ladder of prioritization, because it will have a knock-on impact on our children's well-being as well. So with our partners, trying to discuss demand avoidance and PDA, understanding what it is, supporting their understanding of nervous systems and these survival mechanisms, and coming to a kind of shared understanding of what's going on for our children. Because if we have a shared understanding, we're going to have a shared approach rather than different approaches. And then trying, if possible, to make time to nurture that relationship with your partners as well. With siblings, again, trying as best we can, with acknowledging reduced capacity, to dedicate some one-to-one time with siblings as well, if possible. It can pay dividends. Validating their feelings. That must have been really frightening for you to see him shouting at me like that, to see him hitting me. Really letting them know that you've seen that is scary for them. And maybe offering a bit of an age-appropriate explanation of demand avoidance. So talking about their brain, and that we are minimizing here, but their body and brain get scared. They're panicking. They don't mean to be hurtful. So trying to have that narrative for the siblings and for the child themselves. This isn't part of you. This is something that your brain is doing to try and protect you. And over time, we're going to try and help that not to be part of you anymore. Okay. And again, with extended family into the community, trying to explain that demand avoidance as a stress response, but that presents as avoidance or sometimes as aggression, that their system is going into panic mode. And actually, if we can reduce the pressure, they will feel less distressed and be able to do much more. We really wanted to acknowledge the reality of living in a demand avoidant household, that there can be the experience of trauma for us as parents as well. And like you've just learnt, chronic stress can lead to significant mental health difficulties. Our bodies can only cope with so much. When we are dealing with unpredictable, impulsive behaviour, sometimes prolonged aggressive behaviours, that takes its toll. And the research shows that it can look like complex trauma for parents, that we can experience it like an abusive relationship. And that is really hard to say out loud, that our children are both having a hard time, really struggling. Their nervous systems are in survival mode, but also we are experiencing challenges that are not okay, and we need to try as best we can to reduce the stress in the whole system for everybody. And like we've talked about before, there can be this kind of vicious cycle that, actually the child's dysregulation can trigger our dysregulation, that we've all got a narrower window of tolerances, smaller body budgets, therefore we're all more reactive. That places more stress on the children's nervous system, and we end up in this downward spiral. And for some of us, something significant has to give in order to change that downward spiral. Sometimes that requires a change of educational placement or various other experiences. And we just also wanted to acknowledge that there can be lots of parental blame from professionals who don't understand what's going on, and like I said earlier, almost think that the parental stress is the trigger to the child's distress. And so stepping back and looking at it from a wider view is really important, and trying to seek support to change that cycle is also really important. I hope that this makes sense, that your well-being is therefore foundational to supporting and managing your PDA child, that self-care is not a luxury, that we absolutely must prioritise this. And I found this quote by Maya Angelou earlier this morning. "If I am not good to myself, how can I expect anyone else to be good to me?" So there's something else there that it's really important to model taking care of ourselves as well. And sometimes that can support that narrative around holding boundaries. Actually, it's really important for me to hold this boundary to keep you safe, to keep me safe. This quote here by Laurie Desaltes says, emotions are contagious and brain-aligned relational discipline will need to begin with the adults. So because we are the adults, actually the expectation is on us to start that work on our nervous system. So co-regulation is key, that self-regulation develops through co-regulation. If we're dysregulated, co-regulation's impossible. So that's a really important point to recognize, and we might have to tag out of situations if we are out of our body budget, if we are not resourced. These analogies like you can't pour from an empty cup, or you can't use a faulty thermostat to regulate the room temperature. We can't regulate our children if we're not regulated. So our system is the child's primary regulation tool, hence why it was really important to share with you about our nervous systems. So we must prioritize that. And there's an optional activity for you to do after the workshop here, which is about what do you do to take care of yourself? Or if you're watching this, pause it here and think about what do you do to deposit into your body budget, to fill your cup and ensure that you are at the top of your ladder as much as possible, or that the situation is safe if you're not. Okay. Key fact, if our children are neurodivergent, especially if they're PDA, we are much more likely to be neurodivergent, and much more likely to be autistic, ADHD, or even experience PDA ourselves. Okay, and that creates double the demands. So we've got the demands of caregiving, looking after our kids in the first place, which can trigger our own demand avoidance. Plus, we've got the kids' demand avoidance and their need for control, which can be highly triggering. So really important to recognize this. Hopefully, an empowering message is that if you're a neurodivergent parent, you probably instinctively understand that need for autonomy and flexibility. So capitalize on those strengths and that intuitive, natural sense of what you need and what your child needs. And really importantly, to practice self-compassion, because if we can parent ourselves with a kind of low demand approach, we can reduce the demands for us. We can impact our children as well. Okay. We just wanted to bring in here a little bit about societal expectations, because there's so many societal expectations. If we give them attention, they'll do it again. In a neuroscientific perspective, actually, if we give them attention, we're co-regulating them, they'll come back to the top of their ladder, and then we can have a conversation about what happened. Often not straight away, maybe later, or maybe not at all, because our child's doing enough shame work inside and they're going to come and apologize later. So we're just trying to acknowledge that there are these messages we receive from society that if we're parenting a PDA child, a demand avoidant child, we sort of need to let go of, because we need to think about who we're doing it for. And we're actually prioritizing connection over compliance. We can make that a mantra, connection over compliance, because we're prioritizing safety and regulation, as we've just learned about, and we're prioritizing our sanity and our well-being. I definitely, as someone who felt watched so much by society as a parent and felt like I was going to get it wrong, and actually then catastrophically things going wrong makes you review all of that and think, actually, I need to be here in this moment with my child right now and not care about what people are thinking about me. And that is quite a big learning curve to go through. So another mantra is we can let go of the shoulds. Let's let go of the I should do this. My child shouldn't be shouting at me here in public. Okay, well, they are. Yeah. I also think there is lots of systemic and internalized ableism, especially around things like screen time. And actually, I think there's loads of great resources. Naomi Fisher has got some courses around screen time and really challenging our ideas about screen time, because for lots of our neurodivergent kids who are multiply neurodivergent, maybe dyspraxic, dyslexic, they feel competent when they're gaming. They feel good. And there is lots of good things about that. There are lots of challenges too. And there's this quote from a mum in this study where it says, it's hard to let go of the control when you so badly want to have this ideal way of kind of, parenting. But the more that you try and guide and teach, the more it sets them off. So that's that classic, like, I'm trying to control you, but you are really pushing against that. So this drive for autonomy, and lots of our kids have a really strong sense of social justice. They're like, why do I have to do that? Why? And they show up some of these societal expectations, which are really there for the masses, but perhaps not for us. So what can we do about it? Finding community, and there are going to be some recommendations in the resources. If we can, letting go of guilt and shame is such an inhibiting emotion. I am a mess up, because it's often about us being bad. So really, really, where you can, let go of that, and offering ourselves self-compassion as if you would offer it to a friend. So asking yourself, would I speak like this to my friend? Would I say those negative things to my friend? Because often we wouldn't. There is an amazing, very brief kind of guided contemplation or meditation by Kristin Neff called the Self-Compassion Break. And it's basically about acknowledging the distress we're feeling, that we're having a moment of suffering, acknowledging that we're not alone, that other people suffer too, and then offering ourselves a moment of kindness. Because self-compassion has been shown to be one of those neurological things that can bring us back up our ladder. It can help ground us back at the top of our ladder again. So that, just to land that in the neuroscience. Okay, take-home messages, always important. Managing demand avoidance can affect all of our relationships, and we can experience chronic stress and trauma. So taking care of ourselves is a main PDA approach. And there are extra considerations if we are ourselves neurodivergent demand avoidance, and we need to let go of societal expectations and give ourselves self-compassion. Okay. Sue, anything to add to that before we move on?
I think it's great to have a completely different perspective on all of this, because as parents, I'm very mindful that many of the parents we speak to are there's a lot of parental blame and pressure on us to do what society says we should do. So it's actually quite liberating when you realize that actually, if it doesn't work for your family, you don't have to.
I think we're conditioned out of listening to our own internal wisdom, and I really want people to get back in touch with that. And some of what that means is listening to your bodies.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And seeing what works for our children as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Observing, witnessing. I mentioned Mona Delahooke's book, The Brain Body Parenting, but she's got there's so many great activities in there, and she's got this one chapter where you map out all of your children's different sensory experiences, and it's beautiful. It's really great. I wanted to include that today, but that's a whole nother workshop. Okay, so I want to make sure we've got enough time for this section, although I hope what we've learned already also links to managing demand avoidance, but this was a very strong theme coming through the survey. So here we go. You might have already realized some of what I'm going to say. So safety is key. So this is what I said I wanted to place at the center of the room today. And I hope that understanding our nervous systems helps you understand why I'm saying that safety is key. What's really important here, and what I think we don't have a common mainstream understanding of, is that safety is not objective. We cannot decide if someone else is internally feeling safe or not, for all those reasons I just spoke about, because we all have a threat detection system, and that is individual to us. Okay, so safety is felt, it is embodied, and so any strategies we use are only useful if we are regulated ourselves and broadcasting safety, because if we're not, our kids are good barometers of stress. They are picking up on that, and their demand avoidance may be in part because of how we're feeling. Please don't place that on yourself as extra blame. It's hopefully helpful to kind of just have an awareness of that. And the strategies are only useful if they don't trigger our child. So just to be really clear, I'm always cautious about giving very much advice or talking about strategies, because there are no universal strategies. We need to pay attention to our own child. So what might be safe or acceptable for one child could trigger another child. So I will give some examples and some things here, because I know people are really desperate for that. But I really think an understanding of your child's nervous system is foundation, understanding of your own nervous system, and doing co-regulation is one of the biggest things first. Then we can look at what those kind of potential strategies might be. Okay. So I hope it follows, therefore, that relationships are key, because for our children, and for many, many children for various reasons, the social world can be really confusing and triggering. And actually, connection, relationships, cues, safety, and regulation. So one regulated social engagement system, top of the ladder, can regulate another social engagement system. And just to be clear, I didn't say this earlier, but when we move down the ladder, which is a kind of biological fact, we move through hyperarousal into hypoarousal. In order to come back to the top of our ladder, we actually have to come back up the ladder again. So if we're in disconnected hypoarousal, we actually have to mobilize and get a bit of energy in our body and a bit of adrenaline in order to come back up to the top. And in order to get right to the top, we very, very likely need someone else's regulated social safe engagement system. I often like to think about parents. We're often our children's augmentative aid. When I say augmentative aid, I mean like a pair of glasses or a hearing aid, because we have spent so many years tuning in and paying attention that actually, I remember when I was walking my child to the door of the school and they're clinging on to me and they've got that separation anxiety. It's because it's almost like taking off someone's glasses. That actually that safety, there's someone else who's going to interpret for you and support you, is not there anymore. So that's obviously going to feel less safe. And as we've said before, our kind of conceptualization of PDA is that their nervous system may be more sensitive and hypervigilant in general, and a bit less able to kind of bring them back up the ladder and calm and resource themselves. And they may be more likely to be triggered, maybe more sensitive to other people's dysregulation as well. So unfortunately, annoyingly for us, the responses of adults can unintentionally increase that demand avoidance. So this is the demand avoidance trap, slightly in a different way, which is almost like the demand leads to anxiety, leads to avoidance, leads to a reaction, and then we're all reacting, and that's increasing the demand and the anxiety and the avoidance. And we'll look at some examples of that in a minute. So the way out of this demand avoidance trap is potentially through some low demand approaches. And you guys might have heard of low demand approaches. So I like to think of low demand parenting as a mindset shift. It is like letting go of the old paradigm, which is heavily demand driven, which has a focus on compliance and being good. And lots of kids can be good on the outside, and those kids, I would say, are much more able to follow rules and be guided by rewards and consequences. Sometimes there are consequences later on for these children, but they're not demand avoidant. They're able to kind of fit in and follow the rules. And I would say that's the majority of children. If we look, I'm drawing out a normative curve here, but there's the majority of kids who kind of can follow this more traditional approach. But for our demand avoidant children, I would say it's contraindicated, a bit like a medication where you're not supposed to take one medication with another. I say, unfortunately, programs like Incredible Years and Triple P, which are evidence-based parenting interventions, they generally get good outcomes. I would say they're contraindicated for demand avoidant, certainly for PDA kids, because they heighten anxiety and escalation. Whereas the new paradigm, which is this low demand paradigm, which I would love to see for everyone, has a focus on agency. It's a sort of non-hierarchical. It's like, actually, do you know, I'm going to treat you like a human being, and I'm going to come alongside you, and I'm going to find out what's important to you. It's a focus on well-being. It has flexibility, humor, connection at the center, and it's about increasing regulation, like we just talked about, and trust. Naomi Fisher's book, I've got it here, When the Naughty Step Makes Things Worse. It's quite a provocative title. When the Naughty Step Makes Things Worse, Parenting for Children and Adults Who Need Something Different. It's my go-to book. It's so good. It's got so many great strategies in it. I'm pretty sure you can get it from the library. But her principles of low demand parenting in her book are they're the reach principles, as you can see down here. So relationships, as I said, non-hierarchical, they're emotionally consistent, available, they're non-reactive. Now we can only do that if we're at the top of our ladder. The environment is fully adapted. They're accepted for being themselves. They're somewhere they can be who they are, that there's active involvement. So one of the misconceptions of low demand parenting is that it's like the same as passive parenting, that which is the research shows is not a great sort of parenting strategy, but it's not. Actually, low demand parenting requires an enormous amount of effort. So there's active involvement. You're being present, even if you're not involved, you're paying attention, you're being attuned, because actually if you're attuned, you're much more likely to prevent meltdowns rather than them happen. I'm not always very good at paying attention and preventing meltdowns. My partner is often like, did you not hear him saying that? And I'm like, oh no, I was doing this one thing. I've only got one track of attention. So again, be aware if you're neurodivergent, there may be extra challenges. But you've got this kind of message to your child: I'm here if you need me. It's collaborative. We're working together. We're working alongside. We're there to help them get their needs met. And again, a challenge for me sometimes is that it's humorous, it's playful, it lightens the mood, reduces tension. At least perhaps sometimes you can think at some point I'm going to laugh about this. But as we know, the top of our ladder, we can only be playful and laugh and things if we're at the top of our ladder. So that low demand parenting is really trying to capitalize on that ventral vagal safe social engagement system. Okay, so I did write some notes about this slide, I think, because it's quite a busy slide. But basically, communication can be really, really tricky and can create demands. And this is an area that I struggle with a lot with my children. It can increase the pressure. And it's really hard, isn't it? When we're just trying to move through life, we've got things to get to, jobs to do, school to get to, actually there are just things that need to happen. And I know often words just pop out of my mouth and then I can see that has increased the pressure. So the yellow side is like the kind of increased pressure side, So for example, we might say, especially if it's the 5th or 10th time of asking, get here now, or there's no dinner, like you won't have any food. Ideally, we could try some declarative language. You might have heard the word declarative language. I always struggle to understand exactly what that means, but here's an example. There's dinner on the table. It's just you're sort of throwing it out there as an offer. I know I love asking my kids loads of questions. How was school? How did you do? What did you do today? Who was there? Da da da. Perhaps instead of doing that, offering that active involvement and that connection. Oh, you're back from school. My day had good or bad moments, but I'm really happy to see you. There's no expectation, there's no demand in that, but it is connecting. I can often feel quite urgent because I've been really distracted, and then suddenly I'm like, no, you need to come right now because you've got a bit of shoes on, I've got to go. And genuinely being able to drop that urgency is really hard. Well, we can leave when you're ready. That's a really tricky thing to do. I'm just recognizing societal expectations and demands. But sometimes we actually don't have a choice if we have a PDA child. Again, those kind of verbal reminders, come on, I've told you 100 times, versus no reminders at all. Maybe collaboratively drawing up a checklist or something that they use before they go out. I feel sad about this one because I definitely know that I've said it at some point. Again, a sort of impulsive reaction. You broke that cup. Why can't you be more careful? But instead, perhaps trying as best we can to move to a kind of no blame approach. Everyone breaks things. I break things. It's okay. We've got other cups. And again, sort of expecting, again, this is a demand, expecting their participation. Will you come and do this with me? Will you come and do this activity with me? And that might be something you've prepared and planned and really, really lovely. But instead, maybe just starting an activity and making it available for them. A couple of these things allude to a construct called strewing, which is where we just kind of offer things or we leave things around the place. Often demand avoidant kids, kids are just curious, aren't they? That they might see something, and instead of us giving an instruction, it's just there for them to talk to us about if they want. So we can do that with activities, we can do that with ideas. Often when I work therapeutically with demand avoidant PDA kids, some of my sessions will be just going and talking and saying, if any of this stuff is something you want to follow up on, just let me know. So I'm strewing ideas as well. So another slide, because you guys wanted some information about transitions, and transitions are so hard. Like I said earlier, if someone's doing something rich that they like and they're having to move something that they don't particularly like, I mean, that's difficult for anyone. But if you're demand avoidant and it's communicating threat to your system, it's particularly tricky. So here are some ideas. Instead of time to stop playing that game right now, are you able to stop, or is there a better time coming up in your game? So giving them, I guess, choice and options. Even instead of the kind of more typical traditional model of I'm going to give you 5 minutes, so you're setting a timer, and I guess this would be a very traditional parenting strategy or autism strategy. Would it work better for you to have 5 minutes or 10 more minutes? Again, instead of kind of like, why haven't you put your shoes on yet? Letting them know that your shoes are here when you want them. And again, I know that societal expectation which forces us to feel strict. Like, we've got to get to school right now. Like, you just stop fussing, versus the like more playful thing, which I definitely struggle with that kind of creativity. So I've had to look for some examples of this because I can't do this in the moment. Something like, I'm going to pretend we're in a Minecraft world and we've just spawned, and shall we take our minecart to school and see if your friend wants to play? So it's sort of like, again, part of me feels a bit bad about this because you're sort of getting around the anxiety around going to school. But sometimes when you kind of can get the child on the wave for the day, they can keep going. Another kind of playful idea is about putting clothes on. So, we might normally say you need to put your iPad down and put your clothes on. Otherwise, especially if we might then threat as well, you won't have any more gaming time today or this week. Instead of that, your clothes are here. I bet you can't put them all on without putting that iPad down for more than 20 seconds. Kids love a challenge. So this kind of gives them a bit of that. Obviously, prevention is best. My parents-in-law talk about going for the conversion, the idea that you can like nip it in the bud before it goes for full meltdown. Again, I'm going to hold my hands up and say I'm not very good at that. I'm actually quite good at holding space when someone's dysregulated, but I'd rather be good at prevention. There's an evidence-based intervention called positive behavior support that I wanted to mention here, especially because this is an evidence-based intervention, especially for learning disabled children. So children can be learning disabled and have demand avoidance. So just recognizing those cognitive difficulties as well. And these models talk about primary prevention, secondary prevention, reactive and post-incident. So we can break down our different strategies into those different areas. If you want to go and look a bit more into that, perhaps, Sue, we can put a resource in the link in the email. This prevention is when we're going to be using humor, playfulness, accepting a genuine no. Actually, when we offer choice or an option, we have to make sure that we don't have. So if we're saying, yeah, we can leave whenever you're ready, but actually in our mind, we're thinking, no, we absolutely have to leave at this time. That's really tricky, isn't it? Because they'll still be feeling that pressure from us. Offering yourself the ability to tag out if there's someone else to tag in with. And if not, taking time out for yourself if it's safe to do so. So even just saying, I'm getting anxious, or I'm getting angry here, so I think you're safe, I'm just gonna pause for a moment, I'll be back in a second. So you're communicating to your child what you're doing and why you're doing it. And sometimes asking yourself, what's so bad if they play another 10 minutes on their computer? What's so bad? Because sometimes the alternative is having a massive meltdown and attacking you. And I know I have retrospectively looked back and thought, I wish I didn't have gone through with that instruction, because we've ended up in a much worse place now. Okay. We wanted to just mention energy accounting, which some of you might have heard of as Spoon's theory. It sort of comes from the chronic fatigue, chronic pain kind of world, where it's just sort of recognizing that actually we need to be aware of how much energy we've got in order to move through our days and our weeks. And it links back to that idea of the body budget, that actually we need to make deposits into our body budget and be aware of withdrawals as well. So for us and our children, monitoring water withdrawals. So again, this could be another activity you do after the workshop where you map out water withdrawals. So for kids, it might be various school activities. If the kids have got lots of maths one week, or particular lessons, or just school in general, it might be particular transitions, particular people, but also recognizing what makes deposits. So actively understanding what fills up, what gives them more spoons, what fills up their social battery, and it's probably downtime, sensory breaks, doing preferred activities, spending time in their special interests. And then also recognizing if your body budget is very small, if you don't have very many spoons, capacity is low, then we need to bring demands down. This is what I mean about kind of demand avoidance actually being a bit flexible, like it's not always fixed. We need to be prepared to cancel or to just schedule less sometimes. Okay, managing escalations. Really important that actually sometimes our children are just going to move down that ladder. They're going to move to fight or flight. In fact, sometimes very frequently. So when they do move to that fight or flight and they're having a meltdown, they're lashing out, they're shouting, there's really intense avoidance, lots and lots of kind of energy. If we can, that's where we're trying to use kind of co-regulation, reducing input, reducing pressure. So at that point, their brains can't engage in rational thinking and talking. So we need to kind of just stop talking so much. I know I find that hard. Keeping our voice low and slow. Actually, there's lots of research that shows if we use, basically we're trying to broadcast signs of safety for them in this moment. So one of my biggest strategies when my children are escalating is to get below their eye level, because it's almost like we're diminishing ourselves, which from an animalistic perspective communicates safety. If we get bigger, we're communicating threat and danger, which is sort of what we feel like doing, because it's like, how dare you speak to me like that? And we need to do the opposite. There's a paradox. We can then bring things down. Have a massive focus on safety. And my job to keep you safe and keep me safe and keep your siblings safe. And so we might need to move away. If there's aggressive behavior, we might need to make sure there's somewhere safe for them to go. And managing safety is a massive challenge. If they've moved down to hypoarousal, so they've moved down that ladder, maybe they've been experiencing chronic stress for a while, and we'll talk about burnout in a minute. They might have shut down, they might have withdrawn, they might be kind of passive, maybe silent refusal, tuning out. Again, if possible, we need to use co-regulation and try and connect with them. Maybe just offer them our presence, maybe doing something next to them, asking for their consent. Is it okay if I sit here? Maybe offering some gentle sort of sensory input. So again, like I said, we need to come back up the ladder. So they will need some sensory input. So it might be like a warm drink or some food, some chocolate or something to re-ground them and engage them. No demands. I recently discovered that offering a game of rock, paper, scissors is quite a good way to bring my son back up the ladder, to offer him a bit of mobilization and some playfulness. Okay. And we can ask ourselves these questions. If our child is escalating, we first need to ask ourselves, where am I on my ladder? If I'm at the top, that's great. If I'm not at the top, you need to ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? And then ask ourselves, where is my child on their ladder? Are they fight or flight? Or are they freeze? And then we can engage with what do they need? Do they need down regulating? Do they need kind of soothing, supportive activities? Or do they need a bit of up regulation, mobilization? So having a range of things, maybe this is another activity for you, having a range of things that offers regulation for you and your child. Okay. This is really hard, but it is a reality, and probably sadly a reality for some of you. When our body has had too much stress than it can cope with, it will move to burnouts. Okay, so we talk about chronic and toxic stress. This is again a biological mechanism. We can't cope spending too much time down our ladder. We should spend the majority of our time at the top of our ladder, and if we're not, there is a risk of burnout. And often in our children or us, it can look like depression, extreme lethargy, and extreme withdrawal. So what's really hard is the body, it's frustrating, but the body's doing exactly what it should do. It's an adaptive mechanism in order to rest and recover and go back to basics. It's a survival mechanism. Okay. I'm just aware, saying all of that out loud, that we haven't said what to do about burnout. I think it's really difficult. I do think that we need to listen to our children and probably talk with the systems around them, but they're going to need a break. And having worked in NHS services where children have experienced burnout, this is when I would probably advocate alongside, if they're in a school setting, for them to have a period of recovery. And then if the child is consenting to re-engage with school, then working to do that, but once they've recovered. So it's really, really tricky because this puts enormous pressure on the sister, the family, predominantly. Naomi Fisher has a great book for teenagers around recovering from burnout, again, which I'd recommend, and she's got some really good resources and very kind of accessible workshops. They're quite, her webinars are quite affordable, and I would kind of look to that. It's a really tricky thing to support and manage, and you will require support around you to do that. We go to the next section, which again was one of the things on the survey around advocating for your child. Okay, so we sort of talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of like relationships, explaining demand avoidance and PDA, that it's a can't, not won't, that it's a response of their nervous system, that it's stress, anxiety, not defiance. And almost kind of, there's a phrase here, think of every request, even a fun one, as a threat to their nervous system. And our job is to lower the demand and anxiety, not increase control, because some people think you need to be more strict. So that might be a phrase that is helpful. Recognizing we're all different, so it's okay for different relationships to look different. And I think this is really important to give yourself compassion, because we can practice equitable parenting. Being fair is not equal, actually, and I think that's really, really hard when there are different siblings, but different siblings have different needs. So trying to support really gently for siblings to understand different starting places, and that actually we all need different things, and we can do that by making sure that we're meeting our other children's needs as well. And I've put here how important rupture and repair is, that we will get it wrong, we're going to mess up, but the research shows as long as we are repairing with our children, that we're able to say, do you know what, I'm so sorry, I totally lost it earlier, and I'm sorry about that, and what could we do next time, or whatever. It also enables a conversation about what happened, but we need to fess up when we make mistakes as well. Maybe even offering like democratic family meetings where we can come together and talk about what do the kids want us to do, like give them a forum for saying what they don't like about the rules in our household, and then think about how we plan those rules together. And that it's okay to have different rules. So for example, if one child has got something, you know, like extreme sound sensitivity, which might be called misophonia, letting them wear ear defenders at the dinner table, or not eat at the dinner table, and for their siblings to understand that that's okay because they don't have the same sound sensitivity. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Some people asked about friendships, and so we've got this slide here about friendships, and I'm not going to spend ages on it again because of the time, but really, really important to prioritize having play dates in safe places, familiar places. So taking in mind that your child's threat detection system might be hyper aroused, might be hyper aware, and they're more likely to lose it. So actually maybe having those play dates, if they feel comfortable, in your home or in a very familiar place, making sure that there's perhaps a shared activity, a shared interest, and that there's a low pressure, there's no expectations there, and making sure that you're preparing your children for those play dates as well. You could even like practice, do role plays with them to help them manage expectations. And again, if there are ruptures within friendships, normalize that. Say actually it's normal to fall out with your friends, but also model and talk about how do we come back together, repair. And that can be really tricky. I have lots of neurodivergent kids who are like, no, that's the person's dead to me now. And actually it is helpful to talk about, obviously validating and respecting their feelings, but thinking about how they might repair, especially if that person has been quite an important person for them. And then having loads of possibilities available to you, including exit strategies, plan A, plan B, so that the child knows that they can leave if they need to. Okay.
So I'm going to briefly cover this slide on school and demand avoidance. It's something we hear a lot about from parents who have demand avoidant children. It comes up in a lot of our navigation calls. And part of the reason is that schools are such demand heavy environments that they're not always a natural fit for our children. So the first thing to say is if you're concerned, have a conversation with their teacher or the school's special educational needs coordinator, that's the SENCO. And some of the things you might want to raise with them are some of the things that trigger your child. So you could give them examples of demands, it might be around direct instructions, transitions, novelty or waiting. You may also want to share some early warning signs as well. These might be specific behaviours that show they're beginning to sort of shift down that ladder. They might be fidgeting or whispering or trying to control others. And I know for me, one of the things my son used to do was fiddle with light switches, and I knew I'd got about 30 seconds to get him out of the room when that happened. And you could also suggest some strategies to help as well, because you're the expert in your child as well. So explain to the teachers what helps, whether it's humour or distraction, or if there's a special interest that your child wants to talk about, that can be a really good way of distracting them out of things as well. And also some strategies that help when things become reactive. It might be a brain break or leaving the classroom, could be time in the sensory room or a sensory tent. It might be, having a movement break in the playground, something as simple as humming or some time out with a trusted adult. And the other important thing to do, of course, is, our children will have been masking quite heavily in school. So when they come out of school, avoiding those questions, giving them some time to decompress and unmask at home. And also avoiding scheduling things when they've got a really busy day. Don't place other demands on them straight away because it's unlikely to go well. And Anita's already touched on burnout as well. So that's another thing to be mindful of, watch for signs that they're becoming exhausted by the stress of masking and holding it together in school. And you could also share some resources from the PDA Society with staff as well. And we would say to you to contact SENDS if you have got any specific questions about your own situation, because they can offer more help and advice. Okay.
Thanks, Sue. That's super helpful. So key messages from that section. Understanding it's a can't, not won't. So having that nervous system knowledge, offering carefully curated kind of play dates if possible, and just finding those kids who our kids vibe with. Advocating for our children is really important, but we need to do that mindset shift first so that we can bring others along on that journey with us, acknowledging we are experts in our children and family, and we'll be able to have that knowledge about what works so we can offer really useful guidance to others as well. Okay.
So in this section, we're going to briefly cover some of the sort of concerns that were raised around sort of moving towards adulthood. And one of the most important things you can do with your child as they move into their teenage years is to start thinking about transition planning. This is really, really important because it needs a lot more time, and your child will need a lot more thinking space, and for example, if you're starting to think about college, then you will want to start thinking about this when your child's about 14, because you need to sort of allow them time to think about what they want to do. and find the right times to talk as well. You know, it's no use doing it the week before the college applications have got to be in. And also you can be guided by your child, you know, ask them how they want to approach things and give them some ownership over, you know, how they want to proceed. And the same applies for if they're looking at, you know, moving on from college to university or employment or training, whatever, you know, and if they say they don't want to talk about it at that particular moment, then it's really important to, you know, respect their boundaries. And one of the things that can be really helpful is to break everything down into smaller, manageable steps. So you might say, okay, well, why don't we have a look at what this college is offering? And then you can open up a conversation with them about what they may be thinking in terms of courses they might want to do. And, you know, one of the other things that's really helpful is to be a team, you know, approach it as if you're doing a task as equal partners rather than you saying to them, we've got to discuss college, it's really urgent. And the other thing that can be helpful, and it's something I did with my son, is do a bit of research first to narrow down the choices. You know, if your child says, I want to do art, then you can go off and work out which colleges offer the course, and then give them the smaller amount of options that makes things more manageable. And we've got a large section on our website about preparation for adulthood and careers, and there's links to other services. And you can also find a lot of useful resources on the PDA Society's website as well. They've got a huge section on PDA and adulthood, and it covers everything from employment to relationships and college and all sorts of topics that kind of crop up as our children sort of move towards independence.
Okay, so we're just coming towards the end of the workshop, and actually I'll just run through, I guess, what we hope are the kind of key take-home messages, and then we're going to invite you guys to just like do some take some notes or take a moment of kind of reflection as well. So I guess some of our key take-home messages, and there could be more, I guess, you know, we need to be detectives. Actually, it's really an invitation to bring awareness to ourselves and to our children and to the dynamic between us and our children as well. And that the environment is key, that it might feel safe for you, but not your child. And obviously we need to think about all the environments that they're in as well. That relationships are key. They need to be safe, trusting and authentic. And we need to listen to our child if they say they're not feeling safe. That we need to make agency, autonomy a priority. And probably it's important to share this understanding in the system. I say probably, in there I've written essential. It's really important that other people around us understand our children and our children's nervous systems as well. I hope it comes across that we think it's really important to prioritize your own regulation, your own nervous systems. You are precious and key in this scenario, in this system, and that there's this kind of paradox that radical acceptance can lead to change. So it's not like a giving up of kind of going, oh gosh, you know, I can't force my child to do this, this, and this. There's almost like okay, maybe if I let go of that control a little bit, trust them a bit, then maybe they will step into it. And at the end of the day, they are going to be their own independent human beings, hopefully. And so they will need to have some of that. And some of our PDA kids are the most autonomous kids. There's can be that paradox. So to just maybe like 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to invite you to think about what has been helpful from the workshop today. What have you learned? Like, just really think about what has landed for you. Again, you know, giving ourselves time to process and reflect on this information. So what's been helpful? What have you learned?
Okay. We'll just put a list of services that you can contact. Obviously, this is just the core ones on the page. So, if you want to speak to anyone about sort of the ND things that have come up, then you can speak to Amaze ND Family Support. If you've got education queries or anything around health and social care, you can speak to our Amaze Send Yes advice service as well. And, if you want to get involved in shaping services as well and having a voice at a strategic level, you can also get involved with your parent carer forum. So in Bretton Hove, that's the Parent Carer Council, and in East Sussex, that's East Sussex Parent Carer Forum. And then, of course, there's the PDA Society. There's lots and lots of resources on their website. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Anita for joining us today. You've been absolutely brilliant and so informative. I just wish I'd met you about 15 years ago, frankly. But I hope everyone's enjoyed it as much as I have, because it's been really brilliant to find out more about our children. And you can see Anita's website's there, and we've also got the link to the Amaze website as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. And I maybe people are feeling like they've got some processing time to do at home themselves, but a low demand approach does feel like too much if you're at the bottom of your ladder. And I think if you are, then I think it's really important that you seek additional support, because we have to climb back up that ladder in order to have the capacity to support our children. And so I think looking in those resources for possible support, because support comes from all sorts of different places for different people. If you genuinely think that maybe you're really stuck at the bottom of your ladder and you might be depressed, then I guess offering to go and see one's GP for support. There's also Health in Mind, which is the local mental health service for adults as well, and not feeling any shame around that. It's really tricky. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.